This game between the 2-6 New Orleans Saints and a 1-7 Carolina Panthers might not look like much, but it could have some major implications depending on the result. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net and Saints analyst with WWL TV. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, we might be one game away now from learning that center Eric McCoy is the team's most valuable player. I'll tell you why Derek Carr's return as starting quarterback is perfectly timed. We're going to kick everything off with a look at what this game really means, because it's easy to write this one off, but truly, this game can have some major impact depending on the result. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making us your first listen and for being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use that promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. If the New Orleans Saints lose this game against the Carolina Panthers, that is where this 2-6, 1-7 Week 9 matchup all of a sudden can create some lasting impact. It's easy to write this game off as ones where it doesn't matter who wins, who loses, because both of these teams are sitting towards the bottom of the NFL, top of the NFL draft order, however it is that you want to look at it. And even Julian Council and I yesterday in our crossover had a little bit of fun calling this one a thumb war after Julian Council labeled it as a pillow fight. And while some of that might be true, right, these are two teams that record-wise and on the field-wise, production-wise, have not looked great. The New Orleans Saints are on a 6-game losing streak. The Carolina Panthers have lost every game since Xavier Woods effectively announced that they were back after beating the Las Vegas Raiders. This season has not gone the way that either one of these teams expected this season to go. But I would say more so to the point for that is the New Orleans Saints, or more so for the New Orleans Saints is that to the point, right? The idea that the season hasn't gone the way that you expected, especially considering how the New Orleans Saints started. You know, you don't need to be reminded of the fact that this team started off 2-0, scoring 91 points in the first two games, and then has followed that up with a 6-game losing streak, scoring 94 total points. I said you didn't need a reminder, but I reminded you anyway, sorry. But this New Orleans Saints team and this organization thought it was going to be in a much different conversation at this point in the season than where it is right now, which is unfortunately among the NFL's worst teams. And so that's why this game does mean something. It does mean a lot. And in particular, for the New Orleans Saints. Here's the way that this game plays out. The New Orleans Saints win, and then no one really makes any noise about it, right? The organization might start to say, okay, got the first win. Now it's time to string them together, all those other things, which I agree. That needs to be the expectation for this team if they win against Carolina. It's not a woohoo, they're back type of a situation. It's, okay, now can you do it again? Okay, now can you do it again? Okay, now can you do it again? It becomes about stringing together the wins just as well as they, unfortunately, stringed together, put together the losses. But if the Saints lose this game, it ends up having a potential for lasting major impact and implications. The Saints haven't lost 7 straight since 1999. And that's not a year that anybody, if you're a part of the New Orleans Saints, wants to be hearkening back to. And to lose 7 straight would be historically an issue. But to lose the 7th straight to the NFL's worst team at 1-7, just below the Tennessee Titans at 1-6. Carolina Panthers have played one more game than the Tennessee Titans and thus have lost one more game than the Tennessee Titans. But to lose a 7th in a row to that team, that's major. That's something that you cannot let happen if you're the New Orleans Saints. This is one of those games that I put in the must-win category, not because a win helps you, but because of how much a loss hurts you. And inherently, any win helps, right? It's better to be 3-6 than it is to be 2-7. There's no doubt about that, right? That's just simply the way the NFL works. But it's a challenging thing to try to climb out of a 7-game losing streak that is capped off by not only the NFL's worst team, by the way, but the NFL's worst team that you handled in week 1. And so this is where the hypothetical loss really gets magnified. But the tricky part here that you're going to have to navigate is the expectation around the New Orleans Saints getting a win in this matchup, right? On the road, up against a divisional opponent. Those are parts of the equation, but the larger part of the equation is just how bad the Carolina Panthers are. And you'll remember back after the end of the first week, everyone's kind of outlook on the Saints was, oh, that's really cool. Like they had a great game, scoring on 9 straight possessions, 40+ points, absolutely handling Bryce Young, 3 sacks by Alante Taylor. What's going on? Are these the New Orleans Saints of now rather than the New Orleans Saints of past? And the answer to that question was consistently, well, let's see what happens when they go up against a higher level of competition. Then they took care of the Dallas Cowboys, who just turned out to not necessarily be as good a team as we thought. But then the injuries started to set in as well. Eric McCoy up against Philly, Cesar Ruiz up against Philly going into the next week, so on and so forth as it piled up until eventually ended up losing Derek Carr for 3 games in that Kansas City Monday night loss. So for New Orleans to kind of rehash all of that, right? To go back to your week 1 opponent and play worse than you played 8 games ago, 7 weeks ago, or excuse me, 8 weeks ago, 8 games ago, that could have a pretty major situation. So what do I mean by major impact, by the way? Look, we've been talking about coaching change and rebuild and all these other things and what it could potentially look like. We can talk about that all that we want, but what really matters is what the New Orleans Saints do, right? Are they actually going to go about it? And we might all agree that this might be the right way to go. This might be the right thing to do, so on and so forth. That doesn't mean that the team agrees. In fact, oftentimes NFL teams don't agree with the idea of, with the same ideas behind where the fan base wants to go, where media thinks they should go, all those other things. So it wouldn't be atypical at all for the New Orleans Saints to say, no, we're staying the course, doing what we think works, you know what I mean, or think will work, right? That becomes a big part of this conversation too, is how much we as media and fans are looking back at what has happened to the Saints while the Saints are trying to look ahead. But I would be afraid to look ahead at some points through the remainder of this season. And one of the things that they have to be afraid of moving forward is what happens if they lose to the Carolina Panthers. And I think that at this point, the deal is effectively sealed unless there is a massive, major, unprecedented, unpredictable turnaround by this New Orleans Saints team, near miraculous turnaround by this New Orleans Saints team, to where they finish with 10 wins by winning 8 of their last 9, or finish with 9 wins, winning 7 of their last 9. That's the hope that can be sold. But the issue is that if you lose this game to the Carolina Panthers, there's not really much hope left to sell. That would be rock bottom. I said after last weekend's game that the Saints are almost at rock bottom, but a loss to the Carolina Panthers, the NFL's worst team, the team that you handled 8 games ago, 7 games ago, in week 1, to show up and be worse than you were then. I don't care that it's on the road. I don't care that it's outdoors, all other stuff. You show up and be worse than you were then. I don't care about the injuries that you have because you got your starting quarterback back, all that other stuff. That, to me, could potentially even speed up a timeline for those potential changes and embracing the rebuild and embracing where this team is. So to me, this game does have some major impact, but the major impact comes from a loss. The steady, okay, now let's see what you can do next. Now let's see what you can do next. Now let's see what you can do next approach comes from a win. Coming up next, Derek Carr, speaking of, when it comes to getting a win or a loss against the Carolina Panthers, well, Derek Carr showed up at the perfect time. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by friends over at Game Time, the best place to purchase your tickets. If you're purchasing tickets for sporting events, comedy, theater, musicals, concerts, whatever it is that you're looking for, they've gotten you taken care of over at Game Time, and wherever you are too. You can just toggle different cities, see what's going on depending upon where your travels might take you, things like that. And they're fantastic because it's where you're going to find the most affordable tickets right up to the beginning of the event, sometimes even selling tickets up to an hour after the event begins as well. So you can go check them out. You can download the app, and then you can toggle on all-in pricing so you're not taken by surprise by any fees, anything like that. There's zone deals right now for the New Orleans Saints Carolina Panthers game to where you pick a section or group of sections, and then they pick the seats for you. $25 tickets for this game. Go and check it out over with the Game Time app. Just download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and use that promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by friends over at 5 Hour Energy, who know that being a fan and being passionate about your football team is more than just a hobby. It's a way of life. That's why they created the Stand the Fan 5 Hour Energy Shot, which is a special flavor called Fan Fuel to keep you going all throughout these busy sports days, no matter how it is that you're enjoying them. And you know what's given a lot of Saints fans a little bit of fan fuel so far this week? Well, it's the fact that they really actually can win a game here going up against the Carolina Panthers. And not to diminish the 6-game losing streak, but in a game that might not move the needle very much if you win it, it might just be nice for Saints fans to see the Saints on the other side of the win-loss column again, even if just for a week. Now, 5 Hour Energy knows that being a fan and who you root for, it requires heart. It requires a whole lot of energy. And so whether you're prepping for your tailgate or you're ironing your jersey, we know that your game day to-do list is always a mile long. That's why this limited edition Stand the Fan 5 Hour Energy Shot is here to help keep you fueled throughout the season. So what's your fan fuel this week? Whatever it is, do it with a 5 Hour Energy Shot, available over at 5hourenergy.com, ship nationwide. All right, family. Quarterback Derek Carr is returning for the New Orleans Saints in what might be the best timing possible. But that timing has a lot more to do with him and his success than it has to do with the state of the Saints right now. That's what we're going to be taking a look at here. The Saints are set to get starting quarterback Derek Carr back, and that's fantastic for New Orleans, who absolutely need a little bit of a boost. They need a jolt here, and a guy like Derek Carr ends up giving you that, right? Anytime you get your starting quarterback back, it's going to be better than your third string quarterback out there playing, right? And you could say third string quarterback either way, with whichever one of those quarterbacks. But getting a veteran back that has a lot of experience and a veteran that's already torched this Carolina Panthers defense is going to be a much better situation for your football team than what you have seen in your two young quarterbacks playing behind an injured offensive line, injured skill position players, a defense is giving up points, yada, 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 right? Like there's all these different kind of angles and everything that we can hit on that. But the biggest thing is that getting Derek Carr back is major for this New Orleans Saints team. And he comes back against a perfect opponent. I mean, even if he's coming back and he's not 100% just yet, remember, it's not a pain thing. It's more of a mechanics thing, right? Can he torque? Can he turn his body? Can he do all those things with that oblique injury? The New Orleans Saints couldn't have gotten him back against a better opponent for himself. You take a look at what Derek Carr has done so far this season, and while he's aided big time by the first couple of games this year, he has been in a situation to where he has not been an unsafe player for the New Orleans Saints. He has a 5.37 negative play rate, according to Payton Analytics, and that is fifth in the NFL, number 5 in the league. And that includes interception-worthy throws, not just interceptions thrown, but interception-worthy throws, sacks that are kind of his fault, and then, of course, fumbles. And so you put together sort of the percentages of all that, and that's where you get this negative play rate. And his negative play rate is the 5th lowest in the NFL, his top 5 quarterback in terms of taking care of the football. And if you're going to lose a game against the Carolina Panthers, it's going to be because you didn't take care of the football. Now, you remember that the loss against the Atlanta Falcons was on the backs of a pick 6, but of course that was a weird situation. Try to dirt a screen. It got popped up by Matthew Judon, intercepted and brought back. That wasn't really like a bad decision or anything like that. That was a fluke of a play. And then the poor interception up against the Kansas City Chiefs early on in the game, where he just launched one trying to get out of bounds, couldn't get out of bounds, ends up getting picked off. Not ideal, not advised in that situation. So I think you have to consider that, like, when the Saints have lost with Derek Carr at the helm, there have been some mistakes over on the offensive side of the football that have led to that. Now, over with the Philadelphia Eagles was a lot more about the Eagles controlling the run game, and therefore the Saints offense not being able to get off the ground, and then the interior pressure once the injuries started to mount there with Eric McCoy, Cesar Ruiz getting, banged up during that game and more. And so I think you have to look at those things when it comes to those losses. And so it was, but just as much as it was about the injuries and all these other things, the excuses that you might hear, it had a lot to do with execution. It had a lot to do with this team shooting itself in the foot. And so when you can get a more aggressive play style, but one that is a little bit safer, if you can stay on the safe side of it, then that's how you win this game, right? It's when you get away from the safety side of it that you lose this game. However, there's not going to be much external pressure for the New Orleans Saints when it comes to that. It's going to be all about the self-inflicted wounds or limiting the self-inflicted wounds. The reason why I say that there's not going to be much pressure on it is because, look at who the Carolina Panthers are. The Carolina Panthers, they don't take the ball away. They don't put pressure on the quarterback to force some of those errant throws. And then on the offensive side for the Carolina Panthers, they don't put up enough points to force you to panic over on your offensive side. Let's look into some of that. So with the New Orleans Saints seeing Derek Carr come back, he's going to be pretty comfortable. The lack of pressure that shows up for the Carolina Panthers per next gen stats, the Carolina Panthers have generated the second lowest pressure rate in the NFL, 26.4% if you're curious, and the second lowest sack percentage as well, just 3.4% of their pass rushes ending in sacks. Now, they could get a little bit better there once they get DJ Warner back, who's dealing with that, sort of coming back from that scary situation with the blood clots and all that stuff. But until then, and we don't know if that's going to happen this week, this has been a pass rush that has struggled mightily so far this season. So when we talk about Derek Carr being a safe quarterback, while still being aggressive, right? The downfield shots and all those things, don't get me wrong, but while being a safe quarterback, one of the top 5 safest quarterbacks in the NFL, doesn't feel like there's going to be a lot of external influence that would send him another way. Here's another metric for you. On top of that, the Carolina Panthers have averaged 2.87 seconds to get to the quarterback on pass rushes. That is the NFL's longest snap to pressure, snap to sack ratio for any NFL team, for any NFL defense. So you're seeing a comfortable time sitting back there, and they have generated just 8% of their pass rushes as or successful pass rushes as what's called quick pressures, right? Getting a pressure within 2.5 seconds. So they don't get after the quarterback. When they do, it happens slowly and over the course of time. So coverage sacks, things like that. When they do get to the quarterback, they don't often end up sealing a sack, and they very rarely get to the quarterback quickly. So you're going to see a very comfortable Derek Carr in this game, or at least it should be a very comfortable Derek Carr in this game. Who will still be without starting center Eric McCoy, but he will have starting right guard Cesar Ruiz, starting left guard Lucas Patrick is there. You've got both your starting tackles, pretty much the same offensive line that he had going up against the Atlanta Falcons in Week 4, basically. And the Atlanta Falcons put some pressure on in that game, but for the most part, pressure wasn't really the big issue in that game. Big issue in that game were the self-inflicted wounds. So getting Derek Carr back is nice as long as you can avoid those sort of, those self-inflicted wounds. If you can avoid those miscues turning into opportunities for an opportunistic otherwise defense, things like that. Carolina Panthers defense isn't much to speak about. Their offense isn't much to speak about. It is not a good team. And that's why I continue to say that this game has huge impacts for New Orleans if they lose it, just because of how bad this Carolina Panthers team is. If we look at some of the metrics here, they are, 32nd in scoring defense, 29th in scoring offense. When it comes to the passing game, they're 21st in they're 30th in passing yards, 25th in passing defense. And when it comes to the run game, they're 25th on their offense when it comes to a rushing attack, but then 32nd in stopping the run game. Last in the NFL. So now you look at a Derek Carr who has played a good brand of safe football, though aided with those early games. He was still impacted by the latter games. That's not going to see a lot of pressure. That's not going to be forced into making mistakes. That is going up against a Carolina Panthers defense that does not take the ball away very often. They got a turnover percentage on defense that is 23rd in the NFL. Not a lot to show for there. And then that gives up a big time run game. So that means that Derek Carr returns, not facing much pressure, with a run game that should work behind him. And of course, his typical style of play as an NFL veteran, where he's not going to have to push much in this matchup. So Derek Carr comes back at the perfect time. The New Orleans Saints need a win. He needs a game to get comfortable so they can try to string together wins if they can figure that out. This is the perfect opponent for Derek Carr to come back against. Coming up next, we talked about that 32nd ranked rush defense for the Carolina Panthers. And because of that, we might learn whether or not Eric McCoy is the New Orleans Saints' most valuable player. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with America's #1 sportsbook, that is FanDuel, especially right now because new customers are going to get, if you put down a $5 bet, you could get $150 in bonus bets if you win. And FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you all the odds, props, lines that you're looking for, but it also helps you place live bets. You can check out the latest stats, live play-by-play, all of that in the same place where you place your bets. And speaking of placing your bets, New Orleans Saints right now favored by 7 points on the road going up against the Carolina Panthers. They clearly like the Saints getting Derek Carr back. They like the matchup between the Saints and the Panthers. And then, of course, they clearly love for the New Orleans Saints that the Carolina Panthers are going to be starting quarterback Bryce Young as opposed to Andy Dalton. So the Saints wide favorites in this one. So maybe you like them, maybe you don't like them versus the spread. Go and check it out. You can check it out today by visiting FanDuel.com and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports book partner of the NFL. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. The New Orleans Saints are going to need to get their run game going, and they have a perfect opportunity here against the last ranked rushing defense in the NFL. It's a perfect opportunity, but if they can't get it started, then you have learned at that point that center Eric McCoy is the most valuable player on this New Orleans Saints team. That would be undoubtable in my mind. I was speaking with one of our Locked On Saints insiders, Jim, not too long ago, who's always been excellent. And we were talking about the injuries and things like that. One of the things that he mentioned, Jim did, was that he doesn't feel like a lot of people have talked about the fact that Eric McCoy's absence has had a major impact on this New Orleans Saints team. And I think he's absolutely right. I think Eric McCoy may have already proven to be the team's most important non-quarterback on the roster. Maybe you can put Alvin Kamara there. Maybe you can put Rashid Shaheed there. But none of it happens without the protection. And the protection has had taken a major step back since the loss of Eric McCoy. And when I talk about protection, I don't just mean protecting the quarterback. I mean protection in the run game as well, as we've seen the New Orleans Saints run game diminish over the recent weeks. Although last week they were actually pretty successful in the run game going up against the Los Angeles Chargers, but just weren't able to stick with the run game. I think they might have gotten away from it a little bit too early, first of all, and then once that deficit actually started to open up in the second half, then all of a sudden, you get away from the run game, all these other things. But I think that's one of the reasons why you've seen the big drop-off in the offense as a whole has been the inability to run the football and the fact that Eric McCoy is such a major factor in that. So you struggled to run the ball last week, getting Cesar Ruiz and Lucas Patrick back, going up against a steady and solid defense. Now you've got going into your second game with Cesar Ruiz, with Lucas Patrick back. 4 out of your 5 offensive line starters are back. Your starting quarterback is back. You have a healthy Alvin Kamara here, or as healthy as he can be, playing through broken ribs, play with a broken hand at one point, all these other things too. Like, my goodness, this dude earned that extension. But you have all of this, and then now you go up against the NFL's last ranked rushing defense. There's no reason why your run game shouldn't work. And then once the run game starts to work, you'll see the ripple effect of the New Orleans Saints of the first 2 weeks, which feels like a distant past at this point, where you'll see 46.5% of the snaps, also including play action and shots downfield, space in the middle of the field, all those other things. I think that those are the things that you want to see back in this New Orleans Saints offense. And the run game is going to be the big part that predicates the rest of it. But if the Saints can't get that run game going, there's only one absence remaining to really point the finger at, and that is the absence of Eric McCoy, which I think would make him the most valuable player on this New Orleans Saints offense. If the Saints struggle to run the football, and I mean actually struggle, like a low yards per carry output, low yardage output, not that they get away from the run game and they don't commit to it or something like that. That's a different scenario. But if they run the football and then can't find a way to effectively run the football, I think that tells you everything you need to know, A, about Eric McCoy, and B, about this New Orleans Saints team, right? Tells you a lot more about this New Orleans Saints team that the most important player on their field is their center. I don't think it tells you necessarily anything bad. I'm not trying to say anything bad about the center position. But I think that what it tells you is that, like, wow, yeah, this New Orleans Saints team was not built to manage or handle depth and adversity when it came to health on their offensive line. I think we've seen examples of that, but we've seen examples of that because they were missing their entire offensive interior. We saw the way that impacted that bad interior offensive play impacted CJ Stroud and the Houston Texans just on Thursday night. Now, of course, he was without his top 2 wide receivers and stuff like that as well, but I'm just drawing a little bit of a comparison here. That interior protection is indeed important. There's no doubt about that. But when you get 2 of the 3 pieces that you've been missing back, and there's only one of those pieces that's missing still, and if you still can't get the thing going, then I think it tells you a lot about that missing piece and sort of the Saints not really ever investing in the offseason in a specific backup center. Maybe that's what they expected Lucas Patrick to be. Maybe they expected Nick Saldiveri to be the starter at left guard. That has not panned out for New Orleans, and now he's been managing that shoulder injury, which, by the way, speaking of injuries, we're going to discuss some big injuries here in just a sec. But I think you're just in a situation here to where you have what you have, but again, not really investing in that interior depth on the offensive line. So something we've been harping about for years and years and years, get a backup center, a true backup center, and the New Orleans Saints had to get into losing their starting center before they really got that situation figured out. Signing Shane Lemieux, bringing in Connor McGovern specifically to play center, all those other things. But those are all in-season stuff. That's not prepared training camp, all that other good stuff. That stuff means something, getting all those reps in, and especially with your quarterback cadence, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. All right. Before we wrap up here, I want to take a look at some injuries because there is a little bit of a complicating factor for this game for the New Orleans Saints as they walk in, and that is the cornerback position. The New Orleans Saints are dealing with a lot of attrition right now at cornerback. So Paulson Adebo is already done for the year. You heard us on the crossover yesterday with Julian Council breaking down the impact of Marshon Lattimore being out of practice so far this week. Rico Payton also being out of practice this week. A key depth player and probably the team's next best thing at punt gunner, by the way. I think Rico Payton has done phenomenal in that role so far this season. So those 2 players missed practice on Wednesday, as we discussed in Crossover Thursday. Well, now here Friday morning, I'm ready to tell you, they also missed practice on Thursday. And in addition to them missing practice on Thursday, Kool-Aid McKinstry was a midweek downgrade with a hamstring injury. Did not participate on Thursday as well. He was limited on Wednesday. So the Saints, what I want to point out are 3 things that this trifecta of injury issue at cornerback means, right? The first thing I want to point out is that this means you have 1 healthy corner on your active roster. I can be a little bit generous and say 2 because Ugo Amadi, New Orleans Saints safety, typically plays in the slot for them more than anything else. So I could call him a slot cornerback, give him 2, but really it's 1, and it's Alontae Taylor. So you got 1 healthy active roster cornerback right now, meaning that you're probably going to have to call up practice squad guys like Shamar Jean-Charles as well as Trey Herndon. Now, both of them are solid players. Shamar Jean-Charles, we really got to see some good things out of, but that was in the preseason. What does he look like in the regular season? We know how that goes and everything. It's a reasonable question to ask, but I think he's a very talented player, so we'll see. And then that's kind of where you sit right now if you're the New Orleans Saints. So they could walk into this game at cornerback with, they definitely have no Paulson Adebo. They could be without Marshon Lattimore. They could be without Rico Payton, and they could potentially be without Kool-Aid McKinstry, meaning that you're going to Alontae Taylor. Great. No problem there. Shamar Jean-Charles, just a question mark. Trey Herndon, very big question mark because he just got signed to the team this offseason. And then Ugo Amadi, who really only plays at safety for you. Safety and at slot, in the slot for you. So I think that's kind of where this New Orleans Saints team is right now. And that's not great over on the defensive side. So that's 1. The second thing is that when you look at this, it's also hamstring injuries for Marshon Lattimore, hamstring injury for Kool-Aid McKinstry, and then, by the way, hamstring injury for running back Kendry Miller as well. So you're seeing the hamstring injuries tick back up. You're seeing the soft tissue injuries, oblique injury for players, in addition to Derek Carr, back injury for Rico Payton, to where if that's a back muscle thing, then that would be considered that. If not, then maybe not. But something to watch out for there. And then on top of all that, midweek downgrades, midweek injuries, all these other things. Those are the things that you're looking at for this New Orleans Saints team. So just something to watch out for. The good news for New Orleans is that, well, Carolina just doesn't have much of an air attack. Rookie Xavier Legette's maybe the biggest threat, but the Saints gave up some big yardage and 2 touchdowns to Ladd McConkey last week up against the Los Angeles Chargers. So all things to watch going into this game. So hopefully the New Orleans Saints defense is able to stand tall still against that passing game. Tyrann Mathieu was back after missing Wednesday with illness, those other things. So hopefully they're in a better situation there. Whole lot that we're looking at when it comes down to this game. Not one that will be without event, that's for sure. We appreciate you very much for being here. We'll have you covered post-game on Sunday at Bank of America Stadium in Charlotte. And then, of course, continue to keep things rolling on here Monday through Friday, all through next week, as we take a look at whatever happens with this New Orleans Saints Carolina Panthers game. We appreciate you very much, as always, making us your first listen. Go and check out Locked On NFL as your second listen today. And we appreciate you for making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me on the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.